Rachel Carter moved quietly through the vast hallways of the prestigious Lincoln Conservatory, the sound of her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor, barely audible over the distant hum of practicing students. At 28, she had become a ghost in these halls, just another invisible worker in a faded beige uniform, her dark hair tied back into a simple ponytail, her movements efficient but unnoticed. She had spent 3 years here, cleaning up after the aspiring musicians and celebrated faculty, her own dreams long buried beneath layers of dust and routine. As she passed the grand staircase, her hands automatically reached for the banister, giving it a quick polish with the cloth tucked in her pocket. Her eyes swept over the portraits of composers lining the walls, each one a testament to the history of the conservatory. She adjusted a slightly crooked frame without a second thought, her touch gentle, almost reverential. Rachel had never been part of this world of music and prestige, though it was the world she had once dreamed of belonging to. Now she was a fixture, a background player in a story she no longer believed was hers to tell. She paused near the reception area, adjusting her apron, just as her supervisor, Mr. Collins, glanced up from his clipboard. "Rachel, the board members from the foundation are coming in today. Can you handle the reception area?" he asked, his tone brisk, not bothering to make eye contact. "Yes, Mr. Collins," she responded softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the conservatory. Her gaze briefly flickered over the grand piano in the corner of the room, its polished surface gleaming under the chandeliers. For a brief moment, a flicker of longing crossed her face. This piano, the centerpiece of so many recitals and fundraisers, had once been her dream, just as the rest of her life had been. But those dreams had slipped away long ago, replaced by the steady rhythm of dusting, mopping, and emptying trash bins. Rachel shook her head slightly, as if to banish the thought, and continued her work. She had long since made her peace with the fact that this was her life now. Music, once the driving force of her existence, had become a distant memory, a ghost she no longer chased. As Rachel moved toward the reception area, she couldn't help but notice the hum of excitement in the air. The conservatory was always full of energy, but today it felt different. The polished brass lamps and gleaming floors reflected the anticipation of an event, and the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers. It was Gala Night, the annual fundraiser that brought in donors, patrons, and famous alumni to the Grand Hall. It was a night for the school to shine, for the students to perform, and for the faculty to bask in their success. It was a night that Rachel had long ceased to be a part of, though she had once dreamed of performing on this very stage. She stepped into the reception area, her eyes scanning the room as she adjusted the chairs and ensured everything was in its place. The sounds of students practicing piano and violin could be heard faintly through the thick walls of the conservatory. Rachel knew the music well, each note a reminder of what could have been. As she rearranged the chairs, she overheard a conversation between two of the faculty members, voices filled with the kind of casual arrogance that was all too familiar to her. "The foundation board's here," said Lauren Matthews, the head of the conservatory's faculty, her tone sharp with authority. "We need everything to be perfect, or they'll pull funding for the program." Rachel tried to ignore the sharpness in Lauren's voice, her usual detached gaze trained on the chairs. But it wasn't just the words that stung. It was the way they spoke about the gala, about the money, the status, and the importance of appearances, none of which had anything to do with someone like her. From the corner of the room, Rachel saw Olivia Turner, the conservatory's prize piano instructor, walking past with her head held high. Olivia was the epitome of success, elegant, poised, with an air of superiority that Rachel could feel from across the room. But as the sounds of footsteps faded, Rachel's thoughts drifted back to the piano in the corner. The Steinway, just a few feet away, was a symbol of everything she had once aspired to. She quickly shook her head, banishing the thought before it could take root. Despite herself, Rachel's fingers brushed against the edge of the grand piano as she passed by, a silent, fleeting gesture, a reminder of the dreams she had quietly locked away. There was no place for someone like her in this world, no room for the kind of dreams she once had. But as the evening progressed and guests began to fill the grand hall, Rachel couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. For once, she felt a strange pull, a sense of urgency. Tonight, something was different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it yet. Rachel Carter worked through the evening, her movements quiet but purposeful as she straightened the chairs and wiped down the reception desk. The sounds of laughter and polite conversation from the gala echoed through the hallway, but she remained in the background, as she always did. She had long grown accustomed to being invisible, a mere part of the building's infrastructure, unnoticed and unimportant. Tonight was no different. Her gaze drifted over to the grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the dim lights. For a brief moment, Rachel felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. It was the familiar ache of longing, a desire she had tried to bury under years of cleaning floors and emptying trash. She had once played piano with a passion, the music flowing through her like a lifeline. But those dreams had slipped away, buried beneath the reality of bills, obligations, and the weight of responsibility that had come after her grandmother's stroke. As she continued her rounds, Rachel's thoughts wandered back to her younger self, the version of her that had walked into these halls with hope in her eyes, determined to make it as a pianist. The dream had been so clear then, so bright. She could still remember the feeling of her fingers dancing across the keys of her grandmother's old piano, the excitement of playing in front of a small audience, the applause that had filled the room. But somewhere along the way, that dream had faded. Life had pulled her in a different direction, and she had let it. The sound of a student practicing nearby snapped Rachel back to the present. The melody was simple but beautifully played, each note filled with the kind of determination she had once known. She stood still for a moment, listening to the music, feeling a familiar warmth spread through her chest. It was bittersweet, that feeling, the recognition of what had been lost, and the simultaneous reminder of what still remained within her. Rachel's fingers lingered on the edge of a dusted shelf, her thoughts still tangled with the music that had echoed through the hallway. For a moment she wondered what it would feel like to step back into that world. But no, that was a dream for someone else, someone with the time, the resources, and the talent to make it. She had long since accepted that. Her reality was here, in this quiet corner of the conservatory, where she was just another forgotten soul, her dreams buried in the dusty corners of her mind. As the night wore on, the guests began to trickle in, their voices growing louder, their laughter more pronounced. Rachel watched as they passed her, absorbed in their own worlds, discussing music, art, and success. She couldn't help but overhear bits and pieces of their conversations, the kind of conversations that once excited her, that once made her feel as if she, too, could belong. But now it only served as a reminder of the distance between who she was and who she had once dreamed of becoming. Suddenly, her supervisor, Mr. Collins, appeared at the door. "Rachel," he called, his voice carrying over the growing noise of the event. "I need you to make sure the chairs in the main hall are set up properly. The guests are arriving, and everything needs to be perfect." Rachel nodded without a word, her hands already moving to straighten the chairs. She had become an expert at making everything look perfect, even if it wasn't. She adjusted the chairs with precision, ensuring the space would look impeccable for the wealthy patrons who had no idea who she was or cared. Her task, as always, was to make the place shine while she remained hidden in the background. As the gala unfolded, Rachel's thoughts turned back to the piano. The Steinway in the corner, standing tall and proud, seemed to call to her. It was a symbol of everything she had once hoped for and everything she would never have. But as she set another chair in place, something inside her shifted. She felt the familiar stir of ambition, of a dream not entirely extinguished. It was faint, like a whisper, but it was there. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel wasn't sure if she was ready to ignore it anymore. The next day, the conservatory buzzed with preparations for the gala. Rachel moved through the halls, carrying out her duties as always, her steps measured and her head down. She had become an expert at staying out of sight, avoiding eye contact with the students and staff who never really saw her. But today, something felt different. The usual hum of activity was laced with a nervous energy, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. It was just after lunch when the call came. Mr. Collins, looking more flustered than usual, hurried into the reception area. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Rachel. "Rachel, can you come to the main hall for a moment?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. Rachel frowned, unsure of what could have gone wrong. She followed him, her sneakers clicking softly on the marble floor as they walked. When they reached the main hall, a small group of staff and faculty members had gathered near the stage, talking in hushed voices. Rachel's stomach tightened as she noticed the worried looks on their faces. Lauren Matthews, the head of faculty, was pacing back and forth, her expression tense. Olivia Turner, the piano instructor, was speaking in hushed tones to a few of the students, her face a mask of concern. "What's going on?" Rachel asked quietly, but no one answered. Mr. Collins motioned for her to wait as he approached Lauren. Rachel stood at the edge of the group, trying to remain unnoticed, but she couldn't help overhearing the conversation. Olivia's voice was sharp. "The student who was supposed to perform tonight is sick. She's in the hospital with food poisoning. The gala's about to start, and we have no one to fill in for her." Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. She had heard the whispers of the night's performance, the grand event that was supposed to showcase the talents of the conservatory's top students. Without a pianist, it seemed the night might fall apart. As the tension in the room grew, Rachel felt a strange, almost inexplicable urge to step forward. She knew she was just a custodian, invisible to most, but the growing panic around her stirred something deep inside. It was as if a part of her, the part she had buried for so long, was waking up. "I might know someone," a voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. It was Jason, one of the younger teaching assistants. He was standing near the back of the room, his eyes darting nervously from person to person. "I've heard Rachel play before, after hours when the building was quiet. She's incredible." Rachel froze, the words hitting her like a shockwave. She hadn't expected anyone to notice her, let alone speak up on her behalf. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. How did Jason know? She hadn't played in front of anyone for years. Her fingers were stiff from disuse, her confidence long gone. But here she was, unexpectedly thrust into the center of attention, as if fate had decided to make her life a spectacle. Lauren Matthews turned toward her sharp gaze scanning Rachel from head to toe. There was a brief pause, then she spoke, her tone cool but with a hint of curiosity. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice more commanding than Rachel had ever heard it before. "You can play?" Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted to refuse, to slip away and hide behind the safety of her cleaning supplies, but instead she found herself nodding. "Yes, ma'am, I can play." A murmur ran through the room as the faculty members exchanged glances. Olivia Turner stepped forward, her arms crossed, skepticism written all over her face. "And you think you can replace Olivia Sanders? The centerpiece of the entire event? A professional who's been training since childhood?" Rachel met Olivia's gaze, her heart racing. But something inside her shifted, a spark of defiance she hadn't felt in years. "I know the piece," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "I can play Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, Number du Biongé." There was silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Rachel could hear the faint hum of conversation, the disbelief, the doubt. Yet despite the judgment that seemed to fill the room, a small part of her felt something she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. The room grew eerily quiet as Rachel stood on the edge of the stage, the weight of everyone's gaze pressing down on her. She had no idea what had possessed her to say yes, to step up in the first place. She had always been invisible here, her role as a custodian meant to be behind the scenes, out of view. But now here she was, the center of attention, standing in front of a grand piano that seemed to loom larger than life. Her hands trembled at her sides, the familiar fear gnawing at her stomach. What was she thinking? She had been out of practice for so long. She hadn't played in front of anyone in years. Her fingers had grown stiff from months of scrubbing floors, cleaning toilets, and moving chairs. How could she possibly step into the spotlight now and expect to perform? The thought of all those eyes on her, waiting for her to fail, made her knees shake. Olivia Turner stood at the side, her arms crossed and a skeptical look on her face. Rachel could feel the judgment radiating from her, the silent expectation that she would mess up, that she would confirm all the doubts everyone had about her. And yet a part of Rachel refused to back down. She had said she would do this. She had said she could play. If she walked off the stage now, She would prove everyone's worst assumption about her, that she was just a janitor, nothing more. The first few notes of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 echoed through the hall, the sound almost deafening in the stillness. Rachel's fingers hovered over the keys, her heart pounding in her chest. The music that had once been a part of her, that had once flowed so easily, felt foreign now. But as her hands finally touched the keys, something shifted. The first few hesitant notes gave way to something more confident, more certain. As Rachel's fingers moved across the keys, the sound of the piano began to fill the hall, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. The notes of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 flowed from her hands, each one a testament to the years of practice she had once devoted to her craft. The music that had once been her heartbeat now felt like a distant memory, but it was still there, embedded deep inside her, waiting to be brought to life again. The audience, initially silent, shifted in their seats as the powerful, intricate melody began to resonate throughout the room. Rachel's chest tightened with every passing moment, but as the music gained momentum, so did her courage. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with precision, as if the piano itself were an extension of her body. The audience, at first unsure of what they were witnessing, now sat transfixed, their eyes wide, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. Olivia Turner, who had stood by with a skeptical smirk, now looked on with disbelief, her arms uncrossed and her mouth slightly agape. Rachel could feel the shift in the room, the subtle change from mockery to awe. The music seemed to wrap itself around her, lifting her, pushing her to play with more intensity. Every note she struck felt like a piece of her soul, each crescendo a declaration of everything she had been forced to silence for so long. And then, when the piece reached its thunderous climax, Rachel felt it. The release, the culmination of all her pent-up emotion, all the dreams she had buried for years. She played with everything she had, not for the approval of others, but for herself. For the girl who had once believed in the beauty of her music, before life had taken her off course. As the final, powerful chord resonated in the hall, the room stood in stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Rachel's hands hovered above the keys, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick with expectation. And then, the applause began. The applause echoed in Rachel's ears, louder than she had ever expected. But it felt distant, almost unreal. She stood frozen at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of clapping, of gasps of surprise filled the room, but for a moment Rachel couldn't move. She hadn't played for an audience in years, and now that it was over, she was uncertain how to handle the attention. Slowly she stood, her legs shaking as she faced the crowd. The flood of emotions from her performance hit her all at once. Relief, pride, but also a deep exhaustion. She had given everything she had, and now the room was standing, applauding her, as if she were one of them, as if she truly belonged. Rachel offered a small bow, feeling the weight of their eyes on her, trying to steady herself. She could barely process the reactions around her. People were still clapping, some with tears in their eyes, others whispering to each other in astonishment. Her mind was reeling from the performance and the recognition. But one thing was clear. She had done something she never thought possible. Then from across the room she saw Jason. His face was filled with quiet pride, a slight nod of approval. He had believed in her when no one else had, when she hadn't even believed in herself. His presence, as subtle as it was, reminded her of the support she had gotten from the unlikeliest of places. But even as the applause began to subside, Rachel could see the others, Olivia, Lauren Matthews, and even Mr. Collins, all standing together, their expressions unreadable. There was no denying it now. Something had changed. The people who had once dismissed her now had to reckon with the fact that she had just played a piece most students at this conservatory would only dream of mastering. As the applause finally died down, Rachel felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She stood there, still processing the rush of emotion from her performance. But now there was a new, unfamiliar pressure pressing down on her. The air was thick with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Rachel couldn't escape the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the spotlight she had briefly stepped into wasn't going to fade away so easily. Lauren Matthews, still standing near the stage, was the first to break the silence. Her voice, though calm, carried a tone of surprise. "That was unexpected," she said, her eyes scanning Rachel with a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect. Rachel could feel her gaze like a cold wave washing over her, but she held her ground. She had played the piano not to prove anything to Lauren, but to herself. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman standing before her was already calculating the next move. Olivia Turner, however, was slower to speak. The shock on her face was almost imperceptible, but Rachel could see it, just a flicker of something deeper than mere disbelief. For years, Olivia had been the golden standard, the one everyone admired, and in that moment Rachel realized just how much she had envied her. But now Rachel had taken the stage, and the roles were shifting in a way she hadn't expected. "You surprised us all," Olivia finally said, her tone colder than Rachel had hoped. "I didn't expect a custodian to play like that." Rachel met her gaze, feeling the sting of the words but refusing to back down. "I'm not just a custodian," she replied quietly. "I'm someone who hasn't had the chance to prove herself until now." It was then that Jason stepped forward, a quiet smile on his face as he approached Rachel. "I told you they'd be amazed," he said, his voice soft but full of sincerity. "You've got something they can't ignore now." Rachel turned to him, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not just as a worker, but as someone capable of greatness. And just as quickly as the tension had settled in, a new feeling took its place, a flicker of possibility. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, Rachel wasn't afraid to walk down it. The days following the gala were a blur of confusion and uncertainty for Rachel. The applause still rang in her ears, but it was quickly replaced by the overwhelming feeling of what came next. For years, she had been invisible, just another worker in the background, keeping the conservatory running smoothly without anyone taking notice. But now things were different. Suddenly, she had become a person of interest, someone who had the attention of people who had never once acknowledged her existence before. She walked the halls, her steps a little lighter, but the weight of the change in how she was perceived felt heavy on her shoulders. Students who had once walked past her without a second glance now paused to smile, nod, or even offer a greeting. Faculty members who had barely acknowledged her existence were now offering polite words of encouragement. Rachel wasn't sure how to handle any of it. Her life had been about keeping her head down, staying in the shadows, and doing the work that no one else wanted to do. She had never been one for attention, never desired the spotlight. But somehow it had found her, and now she was struggling to figure out how to navigate this new world. The offer from the Jefferson Foundation had come the day after the gala, a formal invitation to join their music outreach program. They wanted her to work with underprivileged students, teaching them piano and helping them achieve the kind of success she had always dreamed of. The irony wasn't lost on Rachel. Here she was, a woman who had spent years cleaning the very rooms that these students would now walk into, and they were offering her the opportunity to teach them. Rachel sat at the small desk in her cramped apartment, the offer letter from the Jefferson Foundation sitting in front of her, its bold lettering staring up at her. It felt surreal, as though someone else's life had been handed to her, one that she wasn't sure she deserved. The idea of teaching music, of stepping into a role she had once only dreamed of, seemed almost impossible. Was she really the right person for this? Was she ready to teach, to lead these students who might look to her for guidance and inspiration? Her mind raced as she thought about everything that had happened since that night at the gala. She had played Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 and shocked an entire room of people who had never once believed in her. In that moment, she had felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. And yet now, with the opportunity to help others find that same spark, fear was creeping in. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed them? Rachel knew she had the ability to play, but teaching was something entirely different. She wasn't sure if she had the right words to share with students who might not have the same opportunities she once had. Could she really make a difference in their lives? Or was this just a dream that would ultimately disappoint them and herself? But then she thought about the students she had seen practicing, their faces filled with determination and the quiet joy that came with the music. She had always wanted to be part of something bigger, to share her passion for music, even if she had hidden it away for so long. Maybe this was her chance to do just that. Rachel's first day at the Jefferson Foundation felt like stepping into an entirely different world. The moment she walked into the building, she was greeted by an air of expectation, of ambition, and something she hadn't experienced in years: opportunity. She stood in the entrance, looking around at the polished floors, the sleek, modern design of the space, and the students bustling through the hallways. It felt so unfamiliar, so far removed from the conservatory where she had spent years cleaning, hidden in the background. Now she was meant to be one of the leaders in this world. She made her way to the piano practice rooms where she was supposed to meet her first group of students. Her heart was pounding, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling inside her. The students would be expecting a teacher, someone with authority, someone who knew what they were doing. But Rachel felt like an imposter. What could she possibly offer them? She had spent so long thinking of herself as just a janitor, someone who played music in the shadows, never in the light. When she entered the practice room, she was greeted by 5 students, ranging in age from 12 to 17. Their faces were a mix of nervousness and curiosity, and they looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to say something, to show them she was the one who could help them reach their potential. Rachel cleared her throat, trying to steady her nerves. "Hi," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Rachel Carter. I'll be your piano instructor." Her words felt awkward, the weight of them heavy in the air. She could feel their eyes on her, some filled with skepticism, others with hope. It was a reminder of how much she had to prove, not just to them, but to herself. Rachel took a deep breath, pushing the uncertainty out of her mind. She walked over to the piano and sat down, her fingers instinctively brushing the keys. The familiar sound of the instrument grounded her, even if she was still unsure about her new role. "Let's start with something simple," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "How about we go over some basic scales to warm up?" The students shifted in their seats, and Rachel could see that some of them were hesitant. A couple of the older ones exchanged uncertain glances, as if they were questioning whether a janitor turned teacher could really teach them anything useful. But there was one student, a young girl sitting near the back of the room, who caught Rachel's eye. Her face was full of determination, and she seemed eager to try. It was a small spark of hope, but it was enough to keep Rachel going. As she began demonstrating the scales, Rachel felt the familiar rhythm take over. Her hands moved fluidly over the keys, each note resonating in the room, carrying the weight of everything she had wanted to express for so many years. She glanced up at her students, watching their reactions. Some were focused, others still unsure. But there was something in the air, something she hadn't anticipated. The students were starting to pay attention, not to the fact that she had once been the person cleaning their practice rooms, but to the music she was teaching them. By the end of the session, Rachel could see the change in their expressions. The nervousness had faded, replaced with the quiet excitement of discovery. They hadn't just learned scales. They had caught a glimpse of the passion behind the music. And for the first time, Rachel felt like she belonged here. Not as an outsider, but as someone who could actually make a difference. Rachel's days at the Jefferson Foundation began to settle into a rhythm. She found comfort in the routine of teaching, in the sound of her students' fingers stumbling over scales, then slowly gaining precision. Each lesson felt like a small victory, not just for them, but for her too. The students began to trust her, and she could see their progress, however small, with each passing week. It was the quiet joy she had longed for, a sense of purpose that was no longer tied to cleaning floors or hiding behind a uniform. But despite the growing confidence she felt within the walls of the practice rooms, things were starting to shift outside them. The more Rachel excelled, the more she noticed the subtle changes in the way she was treated by the other staff and faculty. Where there had once been indifference, now there were whispers. At first, she ignored it, chalking it up to envy or curiosity. But when she overheard a conversation in the hallway between Olivia Turner and Lauren Matthews, she realized that things were more complicated than she had anticipated. "I don't understand how she got this job," Olivia's voice was sharp, laced with something Rachel couldn't quite place. She's just a custodian, Lauren. This isn't a place for amateurs to play at teaching. Rachel's heart sank, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She stood frozen in the hallway, unsure of whether to retreat or confront the conversation that seemed to target her very worth. Olivia had always been dismissive, but this felt like something more, like a judgment on everything she had worked for, everything she had fought to achieve in this new life. Rachel stood still, her breath caught in her throat as Olivia's words echoed in her mind. She wanted to walk away, to pretend she hadn't heard anything, but something inside her resisted. She had fought too hard to let this slide. The voice of doubt, which she had battled her entire life, was now fighting to take over again. She could feel the weight of Olivia's judgment, but this time, she couldn't let it bury her. Taking a deep breath, Rachel straightened her shoulders and stepped out of the hallway, walking past Olivia and Lauren without a word. She kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to let their critical whispers steal her confidence. As she entered the practice room, she was met with the faces of her students, eager, hopeful, looking at her with respect, not skepticism. The contrast between how they saw her and how Olivia saw her was enough to ground Rachel. Later that day, as she walked home, Rachel found herself thinking about the conversation, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Why was Olivia so threatened by her? Was it her ability to teach, or was it the fact that Rachel, someone who had once been invisible, was now a force to be reckoned with? She had started this journey as a janitor, someone who cleaned up after the real talent, and now she was standing at the edge of something bigger than she had ever imagined. But was it enough? Could she prove to the others, to herself, that she belonged here? Not just as a teacher, but as someone who had earned her place? As she sat down at her piano that evening, the weight of the questions didn't seem as heavy. She knew there would always be people like Olivia, people who would try to undermine her. But in the music, in the teaching, she found her purpose. And that, Rachel thought, was worth more than any judgment. The pressure started to mount the moment Rachel stepped into the spotlight. Her students were thriving under her guidance, their progress undeniable, and the foundation had begun to take notice. Invitations to events, meetings, and conferences started to flood in. She was no longer the janitor turned teacher. Now she was a rising star in the music world, someone people were beginning to watch closely. But with the recognition came expectations she hadn't anticipated. At first, she welcomed the attention. The validation was intoxicating, a confirmation of everything she had worked for. But now it felt like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. The more people praised her, the more she realized how fragile her new place in this world really was. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to hold up the image that others were building around her. Could she really handle the spotlight? Could she live up to what they all expected? One afternoon, Rachel was invited to a dinner with some of the foundation's biggest donors. As she entered the elegant restaurant, a sense of discomfort settled over her. The room was filled with people who had built their careers and reputations on the backs of the very talents Rachel was just starting to embrace. They spoke of prestigious schools, awards, and decades of influence. Rachel sat at the table, a small part of her still trying to shrink into the background, the old habits of self-doubt tugging at her. As the evening wore on, Rachel found herself caught in a swirl of conversations she could barely follow. The donors were discussing new initiatives, upcoming performances, and the next generation of musicians. And Rachel felt like an outsider, even in a room that was supposed to celebrate her accomplishments. They didn't see her as just a teacher. They saw her as a symbol of their generosity, a success story they could proudly showcase to their peers. One donor, a tall man in a sharply tailored suit, leaned over to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Rachel," he began, "we're all very impressed with your story, but you must understand there's always room for improvement. The next step is what matters most. Are you planning to take on more students? More performances? We have high expectations for people like you." The words stung, though they were wrapped in compliments. It wasn't just about teaching anymore. It was about becoming something they could market, something they could use to further their own causes. Rachel felt the weight of it all, the pressure to conform to the mold they wanted her to fit. What had started as a chance to simply teach, to make a difference, was quickly becoming a race she hadn't signed up for. Later, as she stood by the window looking out over the city, the weight of the evening pressed down on her. The excitement that had once filled her when she thought about teaching now felt distant, overshadowed by the expectations of others. She had worked hard for this, earned it even, but in that moment, she wasn't sure if the price of success was worth the cost of her own peace. Rachel walked through the halls of the Jefferson Foundation with a newfound sense of purpose, but there was a lingering unease in the pit of her stomach. She had spent the past few months adjusting to her role as a teacher, but it was clear to her now that success came with a cost. The attention from donors, the constant pressure to prove herself, and the growing expectations. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing something along the way. The joy she once found in teaching, in sharing her love for music, was slowly being overshadowed by the weight of external demands. One morning, she received an invitation to perform at one of the foundation's high-profile events. It was an opportunity, an honor even. But as she read the invitation, her heart sank. They wanted her to perform Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, the very piece that had made her a discovery at the gala. It seemed like a logical choice, a chance to further solidify her place in this world. But Rachel felt an uncomfortable pull at the back of her mind. The pressure to perform, to live up to the image they had built around her, felt suffocating. It was as if they had already decided who she was, what she was capable of, without ever truly understanding the woman behind the music. That night, Rachel sat in front of her piano, fingers poised over the keys. The familiar piece lay before her, waiting. But the music that had once felt like freedom now seemed like a heavy burden, a reminder of the expectations others had placed on her. The silence in the room was deafening as she sat there, lost in her thoughts. Could she keep up this act? Was she playing for herself anymore? Or was she just playing to meet the demands of the people around her? Rachel sat there for what felt like hours, her fingers still resting on the piano keys, but not playing. She thought about her students, the ones who looked to her for guidance and inspiration, and about how far she had come from cleaning the very halls that now seemed to demand so much of her. What had started as a passion, a love for music, had become tangled with the expectations of others. She wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was a performer, a symbol of success, a story for the foundation to tell. It felt like everyone was watching her every move, waiting for her to prove that she was worthy of the space she now occupied. But what did she really want? Was she doing this for herself anymore? Or was she losing herself in the persona others had created for her? The path she had carved for herself, the one that had once been about bringing joy through teaching and music, was now clouded by pressure and doubts. She had built a life on being invisible, on staying behind the scenes. But now that she was at the forefront, she was unsure if the spotlight was worth the sacrifices it demanded. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Jason, his usual quiet presence, a reminder of the calm she had once found in her work. He stepped into the room, offering her a gentle smile. "You okay?" he asked, sensing the tension that radiated from her. Rachel looked at him for a long moment, her heart heavy. She wanted to say something, to explain the storm inside her, but the words felt stuck. Instead, she just nodded, forcing a small smile. "I think I've lost track of why I started doing this," she admitted softly. Jason gave her a knowing look and sat down beside her. "Maybe it's time to figure that out again." Rachel sat in the quiet of her apartment, the invitation for the upcoming performance still sitting on the table in front of her. The foundation had been persistent, pushing for her to showcase her skills once again at their prestigious event. The excitement and pride she once felt about her journey had slowly turned into doubt and anxiety. She had become a story for them to tell, an inspiring narrative about an ordinary janitor rising to stardom. But was it her story anymore? The music, the teaching, had all been a way for her to reconnect with herself, but now it felt like she was losing that connection. The invitation felt like a burden now. It wasn't just about playing the piano, it was about fulfilling the expectations that had been placed on her. The applause she had once cherished now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the suffocating pressure to meet others' demands. Rachel knew that performing again at such a high-profile event would cement her place in the world they had built for her. But at what cost? Could she continue to hide behind the persona they had created, or was it time to step away from it all? As the days passed, she began to question what truly mattered to her. Was it the recognition, the accolades, the applause that came with playing the piano at an event? Or was it the quiet moments, teaching her students, watching them grow, and remembering the pure joy that music had brought her before it all became a performance? Her thoughts swirled around her, the tension between the two paths becoming more and more apparent. The decision weighed heavily on Rachel. She thought about the students she had come to care for, their faces lighting up when they mastered a new piece, their growing confidence as they played with more freedom. She had always known she was meant to teach, to share the love of music that had been instilled in her by her grandmother. But in the hustle of performance and recognition, she had lost sight of why she had started this journey. Was she playing to fulfill someone else's dream for her? Or was she playing for herself? She could already feel the pressure mounting. The gala would be a chance for her to be celebrated, to finally be recognized for the talent everyone had overlooked for so long. But was it worth it? She had seen the way people looked at her since her performance at the Foundation's event, like she was a prize to be displayed, not someone with a personal journey. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the life they were offering her wasn't the one she had dreamed of. Rachel stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. The lights sparkled, and for a moment it felt as if she were standing on the edge of something monumental. She could continue down this path, chasing the applause and the accolades. Or she could step away, reclaim her true purpose, and return to the quiet passion she had once felt for teaching. The path she chose now would define her future, not as a performer for the world to see, but as a teacher who could shape lives in a way that was genuine and fulfilling. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. It was time to take control of her own story again. Rachel stood in the center of the music hall, the quiet hum of the crowd in the distance, waiting for her to step into the spotlight. The stage was set, the same Steinway piano that had once felt like a symbol of all the dreams she had given up, now sitting before her like an old friend. The gala was just moments away, but this time, Rachel wasn't standing here to prove herself. She wasn't here for the applause or the recognition. She was here to share the music, to reconnect with the joy that had always been at the heart of her love for the piano. She took a deep breath and glanced at the audience. Among the sea of well-dressed faces, she spotted a few familiar ones. Her students, who had supported her every step of the way. Their bright eyes followed her, filled with hope and admiration. And in that moment, Rachel realized that they weren't the only ones she had to prove something to. It wasn't the donors or the faculty. It wasn't even the patrons filling the room. It was herself. Rachel's fingers brushed the keys, testing the piano's tone, and the quiet sound felt like a promise. The room was still, waiting, but her nerves had quieted. She had come a long way, far from the janitor cleaning the halls, far from the woman who had thought she would never get the chance to share her music again. She had fought for this moment, not to perform for the world, but to play for herself, to find her peace. She looked at her hands, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her fingers. It was time to play, to express all the things she had kept hidden for so long. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft hum of the piano fill her senses. When she opened them again, she looked out over the crowd, her heart steady in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, for anyone who had been made to feel invisible. She had spent so long trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers, trying to meet the expectations of others. But now she realized the only expectations that mattered were her own. The first notes of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 rang out, each note vibrating through her with a sense of freedom she had long forgotten. The music flowed with a precision and passion that felt as natural as breathing. She wasn't thinking about the audience anymore, wasn't worried about how they would judge her. She was lost in the music, in the way the notes danced together, telling a story that only she could express. She could feel every crescendo, every delicate passage, and it was like the piano itself was speaking the words she had never been able to say. The applause came, but it was distant, almost unimportant now. Rachel sat at the piano, her heart still beating in time with the music, feeling the joy of being fully alive in that moment. When the final chord echoed through the hall, the silence that followed was thick and reverent. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted into a standing ovation. But Rachel didn't rise to acknowledge them. Instead, she sat there, a quiet smile on her face, knowing that she had already given the performance that mattered most to herself. Later that evening, as the gala continued around her, Rachel found herself surrounded by familiar faces, her students now standing with her in a way they never had before. Their admiration wasn't just about her performance, it was about something deeper. They understood what she had given them. They understood that she had given them more than just music. She had given them hope, the belief that they too could carve out a place for themselves, no matter their circumstances. And as Rachel stood there, a part of her knew that this was only the beginning. The journey she had started so long ago had come full circle, not in the way she had expected, but in the way she had always needed. She had found herself not in the applause of others, but in the quiet moments where the music spoke for her, where the truth of who she was had finally been heard.